Hello, fellow leaders. My name is Prasad Vadlamani, and I'm your host of the Indian Leadership Podcast. I'm delighted to welcome you to our first episode with Saum Mathur, who shares his leadership journey of 7 careers during his lifetime thus far, which spans from robotics to program management to information technology to big data engineering and AI to currently holding senior level business leadership positions. He talks about influencers and mentors during his life and career, where he acknowledges the importance of reverse mentoring to keep himself updated with current work culture. His entry to leadership was just to boldly take on larger and meatier roles and sometimes even seek riskier tasks which come with higher rewards. His advice is not to limit yourself to the assigned role, but always step beyond what is expected. His take is, if you are ready to take initiative, there will always be people willing to take a chance on you. I hope you will be as inspired as I am after listening to the talk. Enjoy. Welcome, Saum, and thank you for being the first person to be on this podcast.
Thank you, Prasad. Really gracious of you to invite me, and it's my pleasure to be here.
Yep. So this podcast primarily focused towards business or corporate leaders or somebody who wants to start something around their career, and that's the primary focus. But at the same time, our life skills and business skills go hand in hand. So I would like to start off with questions around your childhood and growing up in India and that thing. And after that, we're going to talk about your immigration to USA, then your about career, and after that, we'll talk about family and advice to upcoming leaders and some questions. Okay. So please tell us about your childhood in India.
I was born in Lucknow, in UP. My dad was an engineer from Roorkee, from those old days, and he had a transferable job. So we were moving pretty much every year. I think I went to, by the time I did my high school, which is 12th grade, I had changed about 6 or 7 different schools. New experiences, constant movement, change, that was always there from the very beginning. And so my mom did not work. She took care of us, myself and my other 2 brothers. And of course, my dad was there. My dad, he was an engineer. He was very ambitious himself. And so very early on in my childhood, I watched him. I watched him work very hard. He was a very hard worker. I just remember as a kid growing up, and engineering drawings used to be like spread out all over our dining tables in the evening. After the dinner was over, it was his work time. And in those days, there were no offices in India, right? At home.
Yeah.
So the dining table would be just like spread out, and all kinds of engineering drawings would be there, and he'll be marking them up at night. So that's what my early memories are. And then apart from that, as a normal kid growing up, one of the things that I always loved doing was climbing trees and getting into all kinds of trouble like every other kid.
Yeah,
it does. So yeah, that's my childhood. But one of the things there's a constant theme in my life, and I'll reiterate that for the benefit of everybody watching this, is that you carry all of your experiences and your learning throughout your life. So, and every time you experience something, you have to you carry that forward. You leverage that, perhaps not the exact way that you learned it, but in a different way.
So what was who influenced you as a kid?
I think the person who influenced me the most as a kid was my dad. Right now, also, everybody who's coming from India, at least in my generation, that was true. I'm not sure if it's the same in this generation, but there weren't too many choices from a career perspective, right? So my dad, fortunately, was an engineer, but then the choice was very clear. You're either becoming an engineer or a doctor.
Yeah.
But he was also very clear about one more thing. Do not become a civil engineer, because he was a civil engineer. so it was like, do everything. Don't become a civil engineer, but do any other kind of engineering, or become a doctor. And then anything else was like, is there anything else? Kind of a more, right? So
yeah.
that's the influence I grew up with. So from the very early childhood, it was always drilled in my head, you're going to be an engineer or a doctor. And I discarded the notion of being a doctor very, not early, but by the time I reached 10th grade, I was like, nah, that's not my cup of tea for whatever reason. Never quite interested in biology, never quite got it. Organic chemistry was my worst nightmare in high school. I still don't get it. But physics was something which I was very good at. And anything I could touch, feel, see, experience, I was very good at. So that's how I got into engineering, which was more practical for me.
So what was the aspiration to pick the education path that you took, like engineering, but the specialization of that?
Okay, so one thing about my life and my career, if you think there was this grand design, and some people have this, and I admire them, right? That they have this grand design, they know, and I've got some friends. There was one guy I still remember when we were in 6th grade. This guy said to me in 6th grade, I will not name schools, but he said for high school, he will go to certain school. After that, he will go to certain college for engineering, and then he will come to US in 6th grade.
Wow.
Okay? 6th grade, I was still figuring out my own, who am I? I had no bad idea. So I was not one of those kids. I did not have a grand design. Literally, even if you ask me, well, did you see yourself advising startups? Hell no, I didn't. I mean, I thought about doing that maybe only a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So in terms of how I came to be, how I got into engineering, and as you introduced me, my undergraduate is actually from merchant Navy, really, merchant marine. So and I sailed for the first 6 months of my career. I was a sailor on high seas on a ship.
We didn't know that.
Oh yeah. So you don't know half the thing about my career right now, because I always claim that I'm on my 8th reinvention in my career. But did I plan to be a marine engineer? No. The way it happened was, everybody was giving engineering exams, and I was like, everybody had this whole thing to go through. Like, you give the IITs, you give the rookies, you give this, and then at that time it used to be called DMET. It wasn't called Engineering Research Institute. It was called DMET at that time. So you gave that exam too. And in those days, it was a very glamorous thing to do, right? There was no software industry at that time. Right? So you became a mechanical, electrical, computer science was the most glamorous. Merchant Navy paid very well. And it was a very glamorous because you were in uniform and everything is considered good.
Yeah.
So I got admission in there. I said, why not? And I joined.
Okay.
So, that's how I got into engineering. I always wanted to be a sailor in my life. No, nothing like that.
No. Yeah. Tell us what was the reason to come to, Canada, right? What was the reason? What made you pick that particular?
Well, so in my case, my parents. So I grew up in India. I did my high school in India. I did my undergraduate from India, much like most of the Indians do, right? Except my parents were not there with me in India. My parents left when I was in 12th grade. They left for Africa. My dad had a United Nations job at that time. He was building airports, airfields out in the wildest countries in Africa. And then he got transferred to Montreal. Now, I did my undergraduate in India. Then, as I said, I sailed on high seas on a ship. And then, epiphany struck me one day that this is not the life you can lead throughout, right? At that time, robotics was very new. So the robot that I knew of at that time watching Star Wars was R2-D2.
Yeah.
Right? So that was the most popular movie those days, and R2-D2 was the robot. So I said, and I should do something different. Now, robotics was not a very popular field, was not a very hot field, but I took a chance. And this is another nature of mine, which has permeated throughout my career history, which is I'm a risk taker.
Yeah.
I'm always on the cutting edge of things. I'm inventing new things. So this is 1987, when robotics was nowhere, that I decided I'm going to actually specialize in robotics. So there was only one professor in the engineering department, mechanical engineering department, who was a robotics professor. In fact, that was one of the courses that he used to offer. So I walked into his office and I said, I'm interested. He looked at me and says, okay. And it's not like he was getting students every day, because robotics was not such a popular field at that time.
Sure.
And that was the start.
Yeah.
So I got it. I actually loved it. Absolutely loved that field.
Yeah.
So that's how I specialized in robotics.
So and what made you like move to USA? What brought you to US after that?
My beautiful wife.
Okay.
So I married Sonia. She's an Indian, but has been in the US ever since she was 4 years old. Her dad used to work at NASA. And so she grew up mostly in the South, which is Louisiana, Houston, and the furthermost northmost she had been to before she got married or lived was Kansas. And then so I married her. I met her on one of my trips to Houston. I married her, and then we were in Toronto actually for a while in Canada. We were there for 8 years. I was working in Toronto in an aerospace company at that time. And but after 8 years, we had 2 daughters there. Both of my daughters were born there, and we really did not have any family support in Toronto. And when you have little kids, I'm sure most of the Indians will realize how hard it is to manage 2 kids and 2 careers. Now, Sonia herself is a very intelligent woman. She has a computer science degree, undergraduate in computer science, and she's got an MBA on top of that. Very accomplished lady. So we had 2 careers going at that time, 2 babies, and it was near impossible. I called my parents up in Montreal and said, hey, would you like to move to Toronto and help us out? And they laughed. And we called Sonia's parents in Houston, and she says, hey, we need some help. Her mom offered. She says, you know what? If you move to Houston, I'll give up my job and I'll look after the babies.
Wow.
We're like, okay, let's go.
Yeah.
So we moved there, moved to Houston. Now, fortunately, this is where I made a career transition as well. So I went from aerospace and robotics to software and IT. So actually consulting, more like consulting. Well, the interesting thing is that the IT industry at that time did not have the concept of large-scale program management. Okay, and me coming from an aerospace background where every project is large-scale, I had experience managing very large-scale projects. I was also actually, before I left Toronto, I also worked for Alcatel on transport automation, very large-scale, multi-million-dollar projects. So what I had done was I had gathered the skill of managing very large-scale implementations. So Deloitte & Touche at that time picked me up, and they had a division called DRT Systems, and they picked me up and they said, hey, we'll give you a job in this new practice that they had established, which was called delivery management. And the entire mandate of the practice was to incubate project managers and PMO that we take for granted right now, program management office, was a very new concept at that time.
Yes.
So incubate that and then take it to market.
Mm-hmm.
So apart from the fact that the kids brought us to Houston, we also got a job. Sonia got a job as well. We were both in the same. Actually, we used to work in the same company.
Same company. Okay. Yeah.
With Deloitte. So that's how we moved to Houston.
I see. That's an interesting. It's a mix of both career and family pulling you into where you.
And I know that everybody struggles with that, right? Yeah. When your kids are small, we moved where the grandparents were, so the kids could be taken care of. Sure. Whereas I know a lot of Indians bring their parents over. Yeah. Either way, it's one and the same. You do need the family support. Look, you have to have the network of family to help you out, because that is very essential. And in fact, I owe my success to my in-laws to a large extent, because if they weren't there, if we weren't dropping the kids off early in the morning with them, And if they weren't taking care of those kids, then we would not have flourished in our career, because that left us a lot of freedom
Right.
to invest time in our careers.
Yeah.
And I think I'm very thankful for that.
The first job, right? I mean, whether it was in Canada, or I think you probably worked. I mean, the first job seemed definitely interesting, the sailing, or if you want to pick another job from Alcatel, please
Right.
tell us about that. How was your experience?
So as I said, I can tell you my first job, or I can tell you about my 7 careers that I've had in my lifetime.
Yes.
So once I graduated with a robotics degree, I was picked up by a company called Spar Aerospace. It doesn't exist well, it may exist, but they used to have a division which actually we developed the robotic arm that used to fly on the space shuttle. If you remember the space shuttle, there was this gangly white arm, a crane like thing, which was actually a robotic arm.
Okay.
Which used to pick satellites, deploy them, or pick satellites from space, put them back in the shuttle, or sometimes you would find astronauts riding on that thing, repairing a satellite. So I was the lead control system designer of that arm, and took that control system design from what used to be an analog design to a digital design. So that was, and then also developed the simulator for that arm as well. And so that was my job. And then that company also developed the robotic arm that is currently flying on the space station. The next one was, as I said, we moved to Houston, and I took the job at Deloitte. And I joined as a business analyst. My first client was Compaq Computers. It doesn't exist anymore. It was bought by Hewlett Packard back in 2001.
Right.
Those were the clients in Houston. That was also my first introduction to something called IT. And I thought it was very strange, actually. So coming from having done aerospace, coming from mission control, coming to IT was like, oh my God, this is so immature. The software programming practices are so immature. What they call requirements, that's not even a good requirements document. I was just absolutely bowled over by the lack of maturity of the IT industry back then. And I'm talking about 1997. Sure. Anyway, but when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. That's been the story of my life. So what I believe in is, if the grass is dry, grass is always greener on the other side. But if you're standing on the dry grass, you water the grass and make it green.
Correct.
So this is what I did at Deloitte. I actually matured their program management. Given all the experience from aerospace, mission critical, safety critical applications, I actually brought the quality orientation to Deloitte at that time. They used to have a project management methodology, but nobody used to actually follow it, really.
Yeah.
Because it was very theoretical.
Right.
I actually started teaching courses on project management at that time, as to how to do large-scale program management. If you've ever worked with me, I will always ask a project manager for the critical path.
Yes.
Right?
I remember that. Yes.
You remember that?
Yeah.
So that's critical path management is not new. It has been, it's a very old traditional practice, and it works today.
Yeah.
Large-scale programs, right? So those are some of the very fundamental disciplines, and I started teaching courses to kind of mature this. In fact, I incubated a new practice in Deloitte at that time on PMOs, as to how to actually set up a PMO. Created the entire collateral, and that ended up being, I was a practice manager, that ended up being actually not the highest revenue, but the highest margin practice. And you know how I made that? I hired all the program managers, the senior program managers from NASA.
Okay.
And brought them into IT.
Okay.
Right? And when the clients used to talk to them, it's like, oh my God, these guys have done such big projects. They give them the large SAP implementation and the large outsourcing implementations, etc.
Yeah.
So we used to get large projects, very high margin. We used to make a lot of margin on that. So that was my foray into IT. But even on the client side, I actually moved up quite fast. From business analyst at the client side, I became a project manager within a matter of months. And within 2 years, I was actually running the entire IT of that place.
Okay.
Till in 2001, was it? In 2000 itself, the general manager of the division in Compaq realized that, hey, wait a second, there's a consultant running my IT. There's something wrong with this picture. So they made me an offer I couldn't refuse as an executive at that time in Compaq, and so I joined Compaq. So this is now I'm full time doing IT. But while at Deloitte, I also did sales, and so there was a client that Deloitte just could not penetrate. They tried. They used to send the best salespeople. They could not penetrate that client. And this is again goes into my risk taking. So I walk into the door of my manager one day and say, "Let me go in and let me try." And he looks at me. It's like, "Okay, we have failed a number of times. You want to go and try? Go for it." So I actually met with the CFO of that customer and convinced him. Had a couple of meetings. Somehow convinced him that give me a chance to hold a strategy session with the entire CEO and their executive team. Now, Prasad, I had never done strategy in my life, let alone facilitate one at the CEO level.
Yeah.
Okay. But hey, I got that, and I said, I will do it for free. But if I do it for free, you will give me the implementation contract for the strategy.
Sure.
That was the condition. So one day I show up with another person in tow from Deloitte and facilitate an entire strategy session with the CEO and the executive committee. And it went very well. I got some amazing feedback from that. Well, best, I got the contract to implement that strategy.
Yeah.
So that's how I completed the account. And I checked, now it's been a long time I checked, but it was one of the major accounts for Deloitte at that time, which they couldn't penetrate. So I can sell as well. So anyway, back to Compaq. So I joined Compaq. At that time, this is now like 2000, and e-commerce was very new. Now, the division that I was actually in charge of from an IT standpoint in Compaq was an end-to-end division which has retail store, e-commerce, stood up the e-commerce for them. Call center, the first time we stood up e-commerce, which was integrated with the call center as well. It had manufacturing, distribution, logistics, inventory management, warehousing, everything, end-to-end business.
Yes.
It was a $1 billion business at that time. So I was running IT end-to-end. Amazing exposure. But one of my other nature, and again, you've worked with me, you will know this, is I don't know any boundaries. You can call me an IT executive, but I'll do business work.
Yeah.
Right? And if I find any gaps, we'll just fill the gaps.
Right.
And one of the best examples of this is at Compaq itself, where we were actually doing a massive warehouse system implementation, a totally new warehouse system. And what you have to do is when you do a warehouse system implementation is you have to actually do a physical inventory count before you change the system and afterwards. So you don't lose inventory in between, right? Because of the system implementation.
Yeah.
So we did the before count, we did the implementation, and people are working through the night. And now, around midnight, we were supposed to now do the inventory count with the new.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? We walked to the floor in the warehouse and there's nobody there. All the warehouse people had left. So what do? I said, all right, all of my team, and these are all programmers and everything, right?
Right.
All right, hard hats, put on those jackets, you drive the forklift. And we literally climbed the racks and did the inventory count ourselves. And next morning when the inventory manager came back, we handed him the sheets. It's like, here's the inventory count.
Right. I mean, that'll be an experience to remember for the program managers. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's the whole thing. I mean, the key message I want to give to the teams is never think your job starts and ends with your job description.
Yeah.
You are bigger than your job description. And if you want to grow in life, you have to take chances, right? And whether that's chance you stand up in front of the CEO and facilitate a strategy, even if it's for the first time in your life, whether that's an inventory count that you do, which is the first time in your life, there's always things you have to do the first time.
Yeah.
but be bold, take risks. This is also why I always say that I think working in the US is amazing. Part of the reason I've gotten to where I've gotten to is people have taken a chance on me.
Yeah.
Right? This is a risk-taking country. So if you are very narrow-minded in terms of what you are and what your role is and what you can do, you're doing a disservice to your own career and yourself. People will take a chance on you, but you have to be bold yourself. Right? You have to ask for things. You have to just take the initiative and do things.
Yeah.
And that's been the story of my life.
But what made you think that I can do it, or it's okay if I don't do it? I mean, what was that thing inside you driving you there?
There's this tiny voice in the back of my head that keeps pushing me. I don't know why. But it's partly, I think in the early years, I would say it was probably a bit of a fear driving me, but later on it became more of a challenge. So I'll tell you the fear part, right? So I joined Compaq, and then within 8 months of joining Compaq, they announced this merger with Hewlett-Packard. Now here I am, joined Compaq 8 months ago. I really don't know anybody. I don't have any connections. Now, I was smart enough to understand when there's a merger, there are layoffs, because the companies actually, the sum of the two companies is not the same from an employee perspective, right?
Yeah.
So if you don't know anyone, if you don't have the right connections, what's the probability that you lose your job? Pretty high.
Yeah.
And I'm not in a decision-making situation like I get to decide people's future because I'm still new. I had 2 little girls at that time, There was a bit of a fear factor there. So what do? Rather than overcome, so there are 2 reactions you can have. If you're fearful, you can just hunker down, keep your head low. I took a different approach. I went to my boss and said, you know what? I know the merger is happening, since it's in the news. I would like you to put me in the clean room. So clean room is formed. It's a very small group of people who go in from both the companies. They come together. They're taken out of their day-to-day jobs. They are sent in to plan the entire merger and integration. Okay? But there's a very critical condition. If the merger doesn't go through for whatever reason, and HP Compaq merger was a very controversial merger in those days. If it doesn't go through, you lose your job. You cannot come back to your company. Why? Because by that time you're privy to the other company's
knowledge. Yeah.
Knowledge, right? Yeah. So my boss looked at me and she says, you understand that condition, right? That if the merger doesn't go through. Well, I did some surveys. It's like there weren't too many of those examples around where 99% of the time the mergers do go through.
Yeah.
Right? So I said, okay, I'll take that 1% chance, because on the gain was, if I'm on the 99%, I'm on the inside now. I know what's going on.
Yeah.
I'm part of the decision making. I had no experience doing mergers and acquisition, none whatsoever. But I was put in responsible as the head of merger and integration for the imaging and printing business and the technology and IT for that. Okay, which was the largest, most money-making business on HP's side.
Right.
So that's how I went into the clean room. Amazing experience. M&A is an amazing experience. Planned the entire merger and integration. And by the time I came out, I had 3 offers on my hands, right?
Okay. So
that risk paid off. Within 6 months, I had 3 offers and I had my pick. And I picked whichever one I wanted.
Sure.
So,
and an interesting note is, I was also with Compaq when the merger happened.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, and I was not part of the clean room.
Okay, so that was, and I'll give you another example of, so when that fear-led became more of a risk-led. So back in 2006 and 8, we had a new CEO in HP, and we had a new CIO in HP. They started down this path of a massive transformation of the company. That was the first transformation I went through. And the goals that were handed to us were audacious. We used to call them audacious goals. They were like, when we looked at those goals, what we had to achieve in 2 years, We were like, there's no way. And there was no methodology, no recipe, nothing written about it.
Yeah.
And there were no consultants hired for that job. And the CEO was very transparent. He says, look, I will not promise work-life balance. The next 2 years are going to be very hard. This is not going to be everybody's cup of tea. You really have to think about this. You have to talk to your family about this. And if you think you're in and you can figure these things out, stay. Otherwise, this is where my risk-taking came in again. It's like, you know what? Given the fact that there's no recipe book for this, and if you look at my history of invention, like from aerospace and everything, hey, let's figure this out.
Yeah.
We'll figure this out. Yeah. And we did. I remember this was in Houston. I locked my staff we went off-site, we locked ourselves in a conference room for about a week to come back with a methodology as to how are we going to actually do this. And we did, and my team, we were the most successful in the transformation. We achieved all our goals in 2 years that we were given. So again, risk-taking, bold, imagination, invention, all paid off. And that's when I got the job for the CIO of the PC business.
Yeah.
The $40 billion business. So that gave me a lot of confidence, right? Because everybody needs those type of big scale experiences where it says, okay, I'm here. And then, so that gave me the confidence. And then I went into the risk taking for the sake of risk taking. Right? Now I'm like gambling.
Yeah.
There was no fear. Those 2 years between 2000 and 2006 and 8, I lost all fear. Because after you've done what we did in HP, there was no fear left.
Some kind of initiation into.
It was a total initiation. It was like you're now in big leagues. The third thing is, this was also the time mobile apps were just coming in, right?
Okay.
So the smartphones were still new at that time.
Yeah.
And the most popular mobile app at that time was Angry Birds. And that was a consumer mobile app. And there were no enterprise mobile apps. Hardly any. So I got on this bandwagon of like, I think we should have enterprise mobile apps. So I went to my boss and with the CIO with the proposal. It's like, hey, we should do enterprise mobile apps. And he's like, he didn't see any value. He's like, nah. Because his kids used to play with mobile apps, and the only mobile app he knew was Angry Birds. He says, what are you going to do with mobile apps in an enterprise? Mobile app is like an Angry Bird. I said, no. So I went back. I didn't get approval. But this is again, the confidence was already there, right? Maybe a bit of an overconfidence and cockiness.
Yeah.
I told my team, let's go and start developing mobile apps. And we actually ran an entire HP-wide competition. We wanted to make it a community project, not just a Saum and his team project, a community project. So we, without permission from the top, we ran an entire competition. We got excitement built in HP, and we got the community start building mobile apps. Okay. Which was, now the interesting thing is at that time was there was no enterprise mobile application development platform. So we actually developed our own enterprise mobile application development platform. And then we developed mobile app on using that, mobile apps. Once the CIO got the wind that this is going on, and he saw the excitement and the success, one day he says, I have a target for you. Within 3 months, you will deploy 35 new mobile apps. So
zero to 35.
What's a mobile app to getting a target?
Wow.
but you see, this is where I also learned what I now call the art of possible, right? Have a very bold vision and show them what is possible. But there's going to be naysayers. When you're trying to drive a very aggressive, innovative agenda, you will never convince everybody just based on a business case or a PowerPoint or conversations. You have to show them.
Yeah.
Right? So you have to have the guts to start something. You have to be very scrappy about it to start something and just show them.
Yeah.
and you worked with me, you know how this worked in my previous job, right?
Yes,
We literally started from nothing and showed them the art of possible with machine learning, data science, and all of that as to what we can do with digital transformation, right?
Yeah.
That was an example, an early example in my career of mobile apps. So in 2013, we had 35 mobile apps in Hewlett Packard.
Yeah.
So again, it's like my entire life and career is about taking chances, doing things which I've never done before, opening doors, and you'll be surprised how successful you can be.
Yeah.
Just try out stuff.
Everything that you're telling me is aligning to how the travails, of a successful startup founders. This is the story they tell. We don't need the struggle is real, whether you are running a startup or whether you are trying to scale yourself or your team or function within a large enterprise. The struggle is a similar thing. You have to knock down doors, and sometimes you have to barge into the doors, to make yourself present. Yeah, that's a great story.
Yeah. So then I left HP because I served in HP I think for 16 years. By that time, pretty much done all the roles. Need to learn something new, and by this time, big data was hot. So by this time, I had implemented Hadoops. I'd done the Haven and the Verticas and everything. So I was ahead by about 4 years compared to the rest of the people in the industry.
Yes.
And when CA Technologies hired me to head up there, at that time it was Enterprise Data Warehouse Group, essentially. In my boss's mind, although in my job description there was maybe one word spelled around big data, most of the description was around traditional data warehousing.
Right.
So I got in there. One of the things I promised my boss at that time, I said, within 6 weeks, you will have a strategy from me. So, okay, fine. And within 6 weeks, I did create a strategy. But within the very first day I got in, I threw my job description away. And I said, I'm not doing data warehousing. And totally changed my group's charter.
Yeah.
Right? I said, we're going to lead with data science and machine learning.
Yeah.
Technology will come second. Right? So that my entire strategy that I presented within 6 weeks was predicated on that. The first hour of the strategy presentation was nothing but the art of possible. Now, this is 2014, and we still had to educate people because people had heard of Hadoop, people had heard of the big data, people had heard of platforms, but they didn't know what business value could you reap out of that, what could be done leveraging it. So I did not start with the strategy, the traditional way of strategies are done. I started with what is the art of possible in the market these days, and how we can leverage this to leapfrog. So I came up with a strategy, I call it the leapfrog strategy, as to how in 2 years we will be ahead of the market in terms of our maturity. Okay. And it wasn't going to be by creating a single version of the truth, the traditional way through enterprise data warehouse, right? So that was the key tenet of the strategy. Now, internally, I published the strategy, but I remember I think it was my third day on the job, I gathered my team in New York at that time. And I believe in very simple goals. I said 3 goals to be achieved in 2 years. I said in 2 years, we will be the favorites of our business. The business will look at us as true business partners who are solving their problem and propelling the company ahead. That was number 1. Number 2, we will become the catalyst for the company's growth. Mm-hmm. And we will be recognized as such. And number 3, we will be known in the industry where people will be talking about us, rewarding us for the work that we will be doing. Mm-hmm. And you were there towards the tail end, and yes, you can probably attest to the fact that I think we achieved pretty much all 3.
Yeah, definitely. How has, being an immigrant in a different country, was that, was it a positive thing, or is it a negative thing, or is it there is certain things that needed to be overcome, or were there advantages in anything around that?
Well, look, I think being an immigrant is a positive thing because you are leveraging the best of the old culture and combining with the culture at home. The thing that I love about America is it's a melting pot. And what I would say is for anyone to succeed in America, you have to become part of the melting pot.
Yeah.
Now, this may sound maybe unduly harsh, perhaps, but I think what I'm really saying there is that nobody wants you to leave your old culture behind. But if you try to live 100% of your culture in a new place like America, you will end up doing disservice to yourself. Okay? So it's the healthy mix that has to be found. Take the best practices from both, from a cultural perspective, and imbibe those, right?
Of course.
Now, the advantage that I have, and I think there's a difference between people like myself who came here to study versus people who just come to work here, right? Without the benefit of having a master's or a PhD from here. The first 2 years that you're in the college here, university, I look at that as orientation.
Yeah.
Now you can actually mix with the local culture those 2 years, experiment, orient yourself, so that when you go into the workplace, you're going with a healthy mix.
Yeah.
Or you can spend those 2 years totally preserving your culture.
Yeah.
And actually drawing a barrier between your Indian culture and the American culture. I took advantage of those 2 years as an orientation period. Okay. So when I stepped into the workplace, I think I was a fairly healthy mix. Now, that is my point of view.
Yeah.
If you ask my daughters, they think I'm still the old fob that I was.
Of course. Yeah. Like a lot of people, like when I talk to, they carry some fear, right? Like my accent, is that going to be drawing me back, or the way I look, or all this. When you have certain feelings of insecurity and you put yourself in a different place, those things get accentuated, and they can play. You can play that your advantage, your positives, but your negative can put you back.
Yeah, but I think, look, I have an accent. I have an Indian accent, right?
Yeah.
But I don't think it has served. It hasn't done any disservice.
Yeah, absolutely not. Yeah.
So, the key thing is you have to be comfortable in your own skin.
Yeah.
And as long as you're comfortable in your own skin, it doesn't matter who you are, what your accent is, what your color is. Because the beauty about America, for the most part, is that people in the professional circles are looking at your competency, not always how you speak, right, or what you look like.
What did you find, like, raising kids in America while still balancing a career? When we say raise, like, you have grown up, daughters, but each 5 years might have been different, right? So how did you, find that? Would have been easier in India, or would have been?
Well, no, there's nothing easy or hard. I think every place is just different.
Yeah.
Okay. I give my wife a lot of credit for that, Sonia. Most of my credit. Look, I was hard at work. I was busy at work. Honestly, didn't have a great work-life balance. But it's Sonia who took care of the kids for the most part. She had a career. She sacrificed her career quite a lot, to take care of the kids. I'm very proud of both the girls. They both went to Berkeley. Both are working now. Amazing jobs. So, but I give her the credit for that. It is hard. So they went through exactly what Indian parents do. Both of them have learned Kathak. They've learned piano. They were being pushed to do well at school. So all those Indian cultural activities, Western activities, learning the violin, learning the clarinet, all of that stuff. And every Indian parent does. We did the same thing. It was hard, running them to dance lessons, this lesson and that lesson, piano lesson in the evening, dance lesson on the weekends. So that's how our weekends were. That's how every Indian parent is, I think, still, right?
Yeah.
We were no different. So that's a stage in life you go through. But we actually raised them to be quite independent, right? So because we taught them the value of hard work. We taught them the value of doing the right thing and being independent. We raised them to be that way. But the interesting thing is this. There was a time when I think my older one was 16. I did not resonate with them. In fact, I used to say, and I've heard a lot of Indian parents say that they have a sense of entitlement. I also remember I used to say, if they were at a point where they needed a job, I would never hire them because I could never resonate with them. They think very differently. The values that they have are very different. So there was a time when I used to think I will never give these people a job. But I realized very quickly, actually not very quickly, it took me some time. By the time my older one was 18, 19, I realized actually the person who had to change was me and not them. Their values are what their values are. Their values are typical millennial values, right? Guess what? Who is going to be the next employee? It's going to be a millennial. So I had to change. I had to understand what they are about. To be a better executive and a better manager, I can't sit in a chair and pontificate, like do exactly the way I used to do. Like, they will not. The people I'm working with these days, the people I'm hiring, they're like my daughter's age.
Yeah.
Right? If they start looking at me as dad, that is not a very nice work environment, right?
So do you have any advice for the upcoming leaders, as in what is the advice to the leaders who are getting started, and advice for people who have been on the path for some time and looking on to take on bigger roles, like
Feel comfortable in your own skin, believe in yourself, have the confidence, and if you have those two, and never stop learning.
Yeah.
Never stop learning. Those are the three things I basically say. I think those are the three formative foundational things.
And what is one action that you want our listeners to do after, like as first thing to do after they're done listening to this podcast? What do you want them to, like one action to do?
I want you to stop thinking about what you're going to be 10 years from now. I want you to think where you want to be 2 years from now.
Yeah.
Because nobody has seen 10 years. What would have changed in 10 years? And whatever plans you make for 10 years will be invalid in 2 years. So don't look beyond 2 years. And this is a strange advice because a lot of people say, oh, you should have a long-term thinking. I'm saying, no, actually you should have a short-term thinking. But be aggressive about your goals that you will achieve in those 2 years. Whether that's personal, that's professional, 2 years. Where do you want to be?
Okay.
And then be aggressive about those goals and then have an aggressive plan to get there.
Okay.
And then another 2 years, then another 2 years.
Yeah. That's a fantastic thing. I have, enjoyed this conversation a lot. I hope the listeners will be able to take advantage of that. So thank you, Saum.
Thank you for the time. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Good luck.